My name is Yash Sharma. Welcome to Machine Learning in the Sciences, the podcast where we explore the intersection of cutting-edge, data-driven technologies and scientific research. In each episode, we'll delve into how data-driven technologies are being utilized in the real world. From biology to computer science, chemistry to ecology, we'll bring you insights from leading experts in the field and examine the potential impact of these exciting advancements. Stay tuned for some amazing conversations. Hello and welcome to the Machine Learning in the Sciences podcast. I'm your host, Yash Sharma, and today I'm with Jen Gennai. I think I pronounced that correctly.
Close enough, Jen Gennai, yeah.
Jen Gennai, yeah. I think your last name is really interesting. The Jen and then the AI and all the work that you've been doing for I think the past 17 years, 16ish. You're nearing I think the 17 mark. So why don't you just start off by going a little bit into what you do at Google?
Yeah, cool. Well, great to be here. Thanks so much, Yash, for hosting. Really great podcast, and I've enjoyed listening to them before. So yeah, I've been at Google for almost 17 years. I spent most of my career there in the trust and safety organization, so keeping Google's billions of users safe online and making sure that we're understanding any issues or concerns that users have. But about 5.5 years ago, I moved out of trust and safety to set up a team called Responsible Innovation. And that was really focused on responsible AI. So ensuring that AI at Google is developed and deployed responsibly. And one of the initial projects there was co-authoring the AI principles. So for Google, that is the ethical charter of how Google develops and deploys AI. So I've been doing that for about 5.5 years. And as the company is moving more into a AI regulation space, that ensuring that the work that we're doing in the responsible innovation space essentially evolves to be compliance ready and regulatory ready as well. So that's kind of been a few changes over my career at Google, but always centering user safety, user trust, and ensuring that we're having a positive impact on people and society more broadly.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I just wanted to start off with a question, just like a broad question, really. So what are ethics? What are ethics in terms of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so big, broad question. And I've been really honored and privileged to be able to hire ethicists into Google to really get that expertise into a company that we obviously perceived more as highly technical, and we obviously have amazing experts in AI and technology, but trying to bring more of the social sciences and ethics into the company. And so having ethicists help us think more deeply about the impacts of our technology, and really ethics for me, who is not a trained ethicist, but I hire ethicists, as I say, into the company. It's really about what is the right thing to do, and how do we ensure that positive benefits are experienced by as many people and as deeply as possible in as many ways. And so for ethics, as we think about it, is really about the impacts on people. But it's not just about getting to the right outcome, it's also about doing it in the right way. So when we talk about it in a kind of work every day, it's like doing the right thing in the right way, but also being accountable to it. You should be able to essentially show your homework and explain how you're doing it. So ethics isn't just one thing to us, it's many different things. And that's why my team, I honestly hadn't named it the ethics team, and that was very deliberate because we all have our own personal definition of ethics. Your line might be different than my line, and we didn't want to be judgmental about what some people think is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, or your ethics would not be the same as my ethics. And that's why we call the team Responsible Innovation, which gets more at doing the right thing in the right way, that it's also a process of responsibility and to get to that right ethical outcome. But really it's about how you do it. Are you explaining it? Is the AI transparent? Is it accountable to people? So for us, the ethics kind of encompasses not just the outcomes, but also the processes and how you do it as well.
Yeah. So what's the process about deciding how to do things the right way? What goes into that, and how do you decide like what is right? Because as you said, ethics is very subjective. across the board?
Yeah, so I'll start with the kind of where we started in terms of the AI principles, because that really, they are the codified version of how we define ethics, of how we develop AI technology. And so that process took about a year. And at that time, I was doing user research in the Trust and Safety Organization. So that's where I started. I started listening to users. So what did Google's essentially billions or the millions of people who provide feedback to our products, what did they think our products should do? What did they consider positive impacts of the technology, but also where did they find that things were going wrong, or where were nefarious actors taking advantage of people? And so using all of that information from our users, as well as a lot of like market research and a lot of user research and surveys about what AI technology kind of would benefit, but also where are the risks and harms. So a lot of that data analysis took a long time to just aggregate that. And basically that was to ensure that we weren't defining ethics just for Google ourselves, because we had to be aware that we have billions of users. And so it really was, how do we define a code of ethics that our users, our external stakeholders would also agree with? So I didn't want to come in and say, these are my ethics and now these are codified. It was, how do we listen to as many people as possible, and then use that to start our drafting of the AI principles. But then we also talked to a lot of experts in specific fields. So obviously we talked to experts in AI and technology about where the technology was going, to ensure that the AI principles were also future-proofed against what they could do, even if they weren't doing it right now. What could this technology facilitate on a good side as well as on the bad side? So a lot of expert interviews, did about 100 or so of that. And then we work with civil society groups. So people who have experience in human rights and civil rights, in gender studies, and a lot of these different social sciences that could inform, again, whether these AI principles would stand the test of time, and that they would get ahead of some of the key issues. So all that led to, again, about a year's worth of work coming up with the AI principles, and then stress testing those principles again with hundreds of people, not just employees, but external folks, to make sure, again, that those ethics resonated. So that's it. It wasn't just a small group of people deciding that these are the ethical principles for Google, with it's obviously so many users and so many different products, but it was a very inclusive process to ensure that we were being humble about understanding what people would hold us accountable to and what would be a valid approach to ethics. So for us, ethics really is about inclusion and making sure that everyone feels their voice is heard, to inform our technology.
So it's like really what everybody thinks sort of about what ethics really is. It's just a lot of feedback that you're incorporating, and you're just doing a lot of research. And so I guess what is in those set of AI principles? Like what did you guys write in there? And what are some patterns that you saw while doing this data analysis and understanding this feedback?
Yeah. So our AI principles, they really encompass 7 aspirational principles and then 4 applications we will not pursue. So for the 7 applications, these range from common principles that you'd know and be familiar with, like ensuring that our technology works for everyone, that it does not cause any unfair bias or discrimination in this technology. But we also cover broader ones, like be socially beneficial, be accountable to people, which encompasses be transparent, be explainable, ensure that people have the ability to provide feedback, but also be privacy protecting, ensure that we have safeguards in place, ensuring that we are advancing the most scientific excellent approach to AI that we can. And then those 4 applications we will not pursue are equally important. So this is, we will not violate human rights. We will not build weapons technology. We will ensure that we do not cause overall harm, and that we will not provide high-level surveillance at large scale. So those applications we will pursue are unique. We haven't seen as many people come out with principles that don't just say what they will do, but also what they won't do. And those applications we will not pursue are how we assess our guardrails of, again, what we'll allow to happen versus what we will not. So for us, that they are the AI principles, are both those 7 aspirational ones, as well as then the 4 applications we will not pursue. In terms of the themes and trends we heard, that is essentially what led us to the AI principles. We heard a lot that most people were concerned that AI would exacerbate inequality. And that's why one of our main principles is we will not create or reinforce unfair bias. It was a very common theme from many people whether they were individual users or experts in the field of AI or in social sciences, concerns around inequality were one of the greatest themes that we heard, and therefore was one of the largest projects that we initiated. And I'd already been working on machine learning fairness since about 2014. So by the time we were writing these principles in 2017, 2018, we already knew this was an area that we wanted to focus on. So that ML fairness was one of the biggest themes we heard from most people. The second biggest theme was this notion of accountable to people. Was AI going to be explainable? Was it going to be transparent? Were people going to be able to disagree with the outcomes of these AI models? And so that we encompassed in our principle, be accountable to people. So that was the second biggest theme. And then the others, we wanted to acknowledge that it's not just what were the themes that most people talked about. We also wanted to be conscious of which themes and categories would be most severe. So even if not everybody would be affected by the issue, are there issues that, if they happen at all, are hugely problematic? And that's why we had another principle that took into account overall harm. That harm can be super severe. So maybe you getting a piece of spam in your email is one thing, it's certainly an annoyance, but it's certainly not as serious as causing misinformation at a scale that affects an election. And so there's a severity and scale that we take into account for that. So that's why it wasn't always about how many people talked about an issue that put it into principles. It was also what AI issue could cause the most depth of harm, not just scale of harm.
Mm-hmm. And so then how do you see these principles being applied at Google and, to really any company? How would you go about, integrating these principles into everyday tasks, from software development to like product management, where you're making decisions that can influence, how these products are coming out?
Yeah. So one of our key tenets of what we were building in responsible innovation was about equipping and empowering people to make more ethical decisions every day. So what that means is, like, equipping and empowering is people need to be aware that these principles exist. So we spent a lot of time on trainings, on communication plans, not just internally, but externally. You may have seen we have blog posts about the work that we're doing, about how we put the principles into practice. So for us, it's our responsibility as a horizontal team to share the knowledge that we're learning, to share our concerns about potential technologies, but also how to fix those concerns. There's no point just everyone raising their hands and being concerned about the technology without being able to fix it, without being able to analyze it. So we did a lot of trainings around educating people on the AI principles and the tools and the solutions to identifying those AI principles issues. So the equipping is obviously giving people the tools, the information, the education that they can identify these issues and then fix it. And then the empowering is ensuring that we have accountable structures in our company to allow people to make these ethical decisions day to day, ensuring that they have the right support and incentives, as well as central teams like ours that can say, this is the right decision that has to be made. And so that empowering isn't just passive. It was a very active thing to make sure we had governance bodies that would allow for tough decisions to be made around whether technology needed to be changed, whether more testing needed to be done, whether a new tool had to be developed to ensure that we were fixing these responsible AI issues. So that's kind of one of the biggest areas of putting principles into practice, is ensuring that the people developing the technology are empowered and equipped. But at the same time, you can't just put everything on an individual. As many people obviously talk about, there are systemic issues that also have to be addressed. Something like saying AI has to be fair, that is not something an individual AI developer can solve. It's not something that a single person coding a model can solve. We as a society have to acknowledge where human biases are creeping in, what biases are being collected in data, are being inserted into model weights or otherwise. We have to be very conscious of these kind of larger than a single engineer issues. And that's why we continue at a company level to conduct deep research into what does fairness mean? What are cultural considerations around different technologies, how it's received by different communities, whether certain technologies are received better or worse than some technologies. And so also we have to recognize it's not just on an individual developer basis, but also how do companies, how do regulations change? So that might relate then to your second part of the question of how do companies in general think about this. Any company can have a set of AI principles. any company can integrate those ethical principles into their day-to-day work. Not every company has standalone ethics teams like Google had. It's about having like legal teams, compliance teams. Most companies already have these teams. You can train them to think about ethical considerations. We really found that our legal department in Google were our strongest advocates. They were already looking for legal risk. Now we train them to think about ethical risks, the impacts on individual users, the impacts on society. And so it really allowed us to leverage like thousands of really enthusiastic people across the company who really wanted to do the right thing. They just needed to know how. And that's where we considered a lot of our responsibility. Goes back to the first point: education, training, making sure they knew what these principles were and how to spot ethical issues.
Yeah, so from what I'm getting, it's like Google is not just a company, it's more of like it's a community, it's a global community that, has to take into account certain things before it makes, decisions. On the topic of global, what's sort of the long-term vision for the role of ethics in AI development, both at Google and the tech industry as a whole?
Well, I strongly believe in kind of the obviously very traditional approach of private public partnerships. Like private companies like Google can't do this alone. That's why our CEO has been very clear that AI regulation is needed. And we are seeing that globally, that a lot more countries, a lot more regions like the EU with the AI Act are discussing what does AI regulation look like. And that will lead to consistency of expectations as well as deliverables of AI. That it's good that users will be able to trust that the technology they'll get in one country will reach the same standards that it will in another. So definitely a fan of like reducing the fragmentation of a lot of that regulation, but needing that regulation to set that common bar of what is acceptable. What does good AI look like? What does transparent AI require? And what does taking a risk-based approach to AI, seeing more of that commonality, especially through global bodies or broader like OECD and a UN working on a lot of these principles, allows whether like whichever region you're in to know that you can trust the technology in the same way as other people. But like I said, related to ML fairness, there also has to be considerations about cultural differences. So transparency may look the same in different regions or cultures, but something like fairness will look different. So there also has to be some flexibility to allow for, again, common standards with some customization depending on regions. So definitely the AI regulation, global standards. We've worked with the ISO, IEEE organizations for years to try and share our learnings from Google's approach with them, because they are able to influence global approaches to AI. And again, consistency is so important there so people can trust the technology. So yeah, very excited that from a global perspective, regulation, global standards will help people see more consistency and be able to trust the technology more, because they know that it's reached a basic level of kind of responsibility, ethics, and transparency.
Right. So in terms of, this sort of standardization of artificial intelligence, when do you see like regulation being crucial? Like, is it important that we start regulating artificial intelligence now when it's in such an early stage where we don't really know, or do you think it's better if we sort of wait before we start regulating? Like, where do you see regulation, or rather, when do you see regulation having an effect on artificial intelligence research and development and actually deploying such things in the market?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because there's obviously so many different perspectives of it. Obviously at Google, we believe that AI will have a benefit to the world. And we've already announced so many things from energy, environment, sustainability, health and medicine, as well as day-to-day, just ensuring that people can interact better with the world around them. We use AI in anything from Google Translate and search and YouTube, as well as spam protection and everything. Like all of that is good. If regulation comes in too soon, too quickly, too rigid, many of those benefits could be lost or could have been lost if regulation had come in too quickly without understanding the technology, without allowing for that flexibility. So you're exactly right. And I think part of your question was hinting at, if it comes in too soon, are there risks of that? There are risks of it coming in too heavy-handed, but I'd probably be on the side of maybe not too soon. As long as a regulation comes in that allows for flexibility, allows for learning, and is more leaning towards prevention of harm through transparency, accountability, rather than being rigid about this specific thing should not be allowed, because then we lose the ability to innovate in that particular area. An example of that I'll use from Google is about 5.5, 6 years ago, we made the decision to not make a general purpose facial recognition technology available because we felt that technology was too risky. There was a lot of ethical concerns around fairness about use cases. So we said, hey, Google's not going to make this available general purpose because then we lose control of it. And we don't know how people would use it. And we don't know if that would be used in alignment with their AI principles. So it was a tough decision. It was the right decision at the time. And different companies have now, we've seen, pulled back their facial recognition technology because they've come to the same conclusions that we did proactively. But that was a very tough decision. It involved a lot of that research, discussion, like hard decision making. But we believe that it led to the right decision. So coming to those kind of decisions and making sure that we're thinking ahead of the implications is really necessary, and allows us to then say, now we can release the technology more safely. So our research has continued in facial recognition. We've made it contained within certain products. Like if you unlock your Pixel phone, that's using facial recognition, but it's very contained. It can't be used for nefarious purposes. The data follows all of our data privacy purposes, deleted after it's used. So we're able to still advance the research around facial recognition without the risks associated with it. So it goes back to then regulation. If we regulate too much too quickly, we don't get to learn where those guardrails should be, where there are benefits of the technology that could have, again, help us solve global issues that we've never been able to address before, whether it's climate change or misinformation at scale. Like, we can see it use that, but if regulation comes in too quickly, too tough, it'll stop some of that social benefit. So I am a fan of regulation, but not rigid regulation. It has to allow for that flexibility. And that's why we've applied even in Google, and we see it being discussed at our regulation, taking a risk-based approach, that things that are less risky should have less guardrails on it. Things that are more risky should have more guardrails. And so definitely agree with that kind of more nuanced risk-based approach.
Yeah, so while we're on the topic of regulation, I wanted to kind of get into, the government as a whole, and the whole election stuff that's recently happening. I think just last Tuesday, there was in Iowa. I think the Republican candidate was chosen the delegates. So in your experience in AI ethics and compliance, how do you perceive the role of artificial intelligence in influencing or shaping the electoral process?
So obviously our trust and safety organization has developed really advanced AI technologies to help identify where misinformation or disinformation is being created, how it's being spread, but also using AI to identify that and remove it. So I know some people can perceive that AI is all bad in the misinformation, disinformation space, but it's also how companies like ours are identifying misinformation and being able to take it down at a speed and accuracy that we haven't been able to do before. But obviously any new method of misinformation requires new methods of addressing it, identifying it, and mitigating against it. So our trust and safety organization continues to invest people, resources, money, and our technologies into identifying misinformation and disinformation. So we definitely see it as a concern. It's definitely a priority area for us to address, and we're building on years of that experience and expertise as we get ahead of, there's elections. I think the stat of like over 50% of the world are voting in elections in 2024, and so ensuring that our technologies are identifying if and when misinformation is happening and giving people the tools to also identify it themselves. You may have heard about our Jigsaw organization has worked on digital literacy to allow people themselves to identify, is this thing that I'm reading real? How would I conduct my own research in a way that is valid, will get me to the right answers? Who can I trust in this space? Who are trusted sources that I can listen to? So we're not just doing it from our side of technical advancements in misinformation identification and misinformation. It's also about giving people the tools, like what we do internally with ethics, equipping and empowering people to make more informed decisions ourselves. So we do a lot of work on providing digital literacy, putting the tools into people's hands themselves. So definitely it's a suite of solutions we develop for misinformation, but it remains a massively critical area to ensure that informed citizens can make informed choices in their elections across the globe.
Mm-hmm. And so I think Google has a couple of large language models out there, like Bard, and I think Gemini was introduced, but it's not available to the public yet, I think. Um, so like in cases of Bard, how would sort of it distinguish between real information and false information? Does it directly just access the internet live, or is there a sort of database of information from which it can pull its sources from?
Mm-hmm. So with so Bard has in its responses the ability to do a Google search, and the Google search references what are the sources that obviously the information comes from. And Google search obviously tries to answer users' questions, but in a way that is high quality and meets their definitions and intentions. And so Google has spent obviously years refining its search results to ensure that the highest quality results reach the front page and the top of those search results. So the similar technologies for Bard, although obviously a different technology is generative AI, is trying to ensure that people can understand, is there a source or a citation for the information I'm seeing at Bard? And Bard allows for, as I say, you can either Google search the same result and see if similar results come up, or you can see that there's a citation or reference of where Bard had gotten its results from. That's quite different from other large language models out and available right now. And so we do believe that putting, again, that information, allowing people to understand, like, wait, did this come from a trusted source? How do I know it's a trusted source? Google allows for those tools, again, going direct to search, going to the citation, seeing what's referenced there to allow people to understand. So instead of just showing a single answer and you don't know where that's from, we are experimenting with giving people, again, references, giving them, again, a link to go to where we found that information so they can see themselves, like, does this look like a trusted source? How would I understand that? So it is built on those decades of experience with Google search of trying to bring back quality information and learning from that and putting it into Bard as well. So we definitely our experiment and have learned that references, citations, allowing people to see the source itself versus just giving an answer has been helpful so far as we learn what's a sustainable approach to solutions in the future.
And so on the topic of large language models, I kind of wanted to ask, like, in terms of OpenAI and Anthropic, where do you see Google falling into, and what's sort of the strategy while you guys are competing with these companies?
Well, obviously, Google, our focus is on our users and what our users want, and that when our users are wanting to experiment with generative AI, that we're providing these tools for them to engage with. So we prefer not to look at other people, and we more try and center our users, their needs, and give them exciting technology to advance that. So things like Bard, Gemini, as you said, that we've just recently advanced, to continue advancing the technology in this space. And obviously, Google has been researching AI for decades at this stage. We've been using it in some of our core products for many years. Our CEO Sundar had named Google an AI first company in 2017. So for us, this is another step in the journey, but we have a lot of history in this space. We've some of the best AI researchers in the world working on this. So really for us, it's about advancing the technology for the good of users and society and less looking at other people. We believe we're kind of like most people, like we try and hold ourselves to compete with ourselves and make sure that we're getting better while acknowledging we're obviously a large company and operate in market spaces. But we believe we have the best people and the best technology to keep providing the most useful information when people need it.
So on the topic of large language models, I think in 2021, there was a Google engineer, Blake Lemoine. He sparked significant discussion and I think a bit of controversy by claiming Google's AI might have sentient characteristics. Sort of getting into this idea of sentience, based on your expertise and experience, how do you view such assertions about AI sentience?
Well, as I was describing earlier, that listening to users, listening to people who have concerns around technology is central to our jobs here. Like, to do responsible innovation well, you have to be open to people's concerns, where there may be controversy in those spaces as well, and to look into it and research it. So that is what we did. And as I said, we have ethicists here who are a lot more expert in areas like this than I am, who look into these types of questions. And at that time, we didn't find any validity to the claim, obviously, of sentience. But we keep our research open. We obviously listen to experts. And I remember hearing on your podcast with Corey around the notion of like consciousness and how we think about it. And his response was also like, no, there has to be a spark. There has to be something like, as humans are, there has to be something biological that sparked that. And lots of people are discussing it in that way, that consciousness requires certain things that these technologies don't have now and will never have, while other people are open to the fact that, well, life was not planned until it happened, and so maybe something similar will happen there. So from our perspective, open to it. We have to obviously keep ourselves, we try not close our minds, even if right now it seems unrealistic, unfeasible, or anything like that. But I never like shutting down a conversation. A part of ethics, as I say, is keeping open conversations, but we don't invest in that space. There's far more important critical issues that we're addressing now, like ML fairness, accountability people. These are questions of now that can have real world impacts, and that's a better use of our time from an ethics and responsibility perspective. So definitely like a lot of thoughts, but obviously most of the thoughts are that no, there's no sentience or consciousness in the technology.
Yeah. Something I do like to get into on the podcast is the idea of sentience. And while we may not be there now, I think I was reading an article today where I think Sam Altman, he's the CEO of OpenAI, he was saying that, you know, we're getting sort of closer and to sentience, and you know, we're not too far away. So you know, personally, how far away do you think we are from such technologies?
Well, if you're asking personally versus on Google, obviously I'm not answering for Google. And personally, I think we're very far away. I think, and even ethicists would agree, like it's so hard to define even what consciousness is. Trying to define that, then this program technological thing would reach that definition. There's no agreement there. So it seems again that we need to be open to the discussions of it. But from my perspective, and yes, growing up in a very religious household where souls are human related, not related to anything else, it's not something that comes easily to my thinking. But that, like everything, it's about being challenged. It's about being open to it. So I personally think it's far away, but obviously more experts than me, and whether it's Sam or otherwise, they can have their own thoughts. For me, it is not in the near future.
Mm-hmm. So if hypothetically, say we were to try to define sentience to the best of our ability, I know it's kind of different for everybody at this stage. You know, it's kind of a new thing that's been going on. But you know, like the idea of sentience, if we were to try to define it, I think at least to me, what I feel like is there's a difference between, you know, knowing we're not human and knowing we are human. Like when I'm doing something, like when I'm picking up this water bottle, I can say that, okay, I'm the one who's sort of doing these actions. So do you personally, what do you feel like a definition of sentience might be?
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you and the definition of like understanding like your essentially your place in the world and being able to articulate that, being able to understand it. Obviously we have to be careful with language around being able to feel different things, because obviously there's different either medical issues or different things that will affect how true that is for everyone in general. But that articulation of my space in the world and understanding and being able to articulate that as well, being able to experience it. So again, experience can be feelings or otherwise, or ability to feel emotion or otherwise. I would say is close to a definition of sentience or consciousness. The challenge that we hit is obviously then regurgitation of that. Can anyone just repeat what they've heard? Is how people articulate their space in the world, how they articulate their feelings, their inner thoughts, their articulation of their space in the world. So it's that regurgitation that will lead to a lot of confusion. And even when either some of these technologies will claim as as they did, that they are sentient. That is just regurgitating what they've learned that humans would say. So it'll even again gets to we may have a definition, but then being able to say, is that definition then really represented versus regurgitated? And that will lead to many other issues of how do you actually test for that.
Yeah, and I was actually reading an article from Anthropic about the sources that they use behind their responses, where they did an analysis of what texts in their database that they pull from to generate responses, what texts are similar to their responses, and I think in this case they were asking like, should we shut you down, like the Anthropic AI. And so it was very interesting to see, because there was a very high correlation between the text about HAL. I think it was from 2001, A Space Odyssey. Yeah. And so it was very similar in the sense that, I like to help humans. I like to give feedback. And that's also what HAL said. And so, the difference I feel between these sort of things is that, of course, there's a difference between me regurgitating something and me knowing that I'm not necessarily regurgitating something. I just think that the way that they conducted that research was very interesting. So I think I wanted to ask a sort of broader question about Google. Where do you see Google in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of, I think, understanding what ethics is, because as you said, ethics is what people think it is really, and so that view can sometimes change. What was socially acceptable 100 years ago may not be socially acceptable now. So I just wanted to understand, where might Google be within the next 5 to 10 years in terms of artificial intelligence and ethics?
Yeah. So I'm going to give the answer that you probably hate that everybody gives, which is like, this technology is moving at such a rapid speed. It's very hard to even say what will happen in the next year, let alone what happens in the next 5 and 10 years. But I'd actually argue it's easier to predict ethics in AI than it is to predict the technology that those ethics will align with. And because ethics have been around as long as humans have been around. And so people getting excited and thinking like, oh, ethics and AI is the new shiny thing has always landed quite bizarrely with me, because it's just, well, we're humans, we're ethics, we're using a new technology. It's more about thinking, how does this manifest itself differently in the technology? How does the technology either exacerbate an issue or help us resolve it? But it's very rare. It's not that it doesn't happen at all. It's rare that it creates a whole new ethical issue that we haven't hit before. It's definitely, again, how it manifests, who is affected will differ, and we have to think very deeply about right decisions and how to solve it. But for me, thinking about the 5 to 10 year in ethics and AI, like I said, I believe more people will be educated in understanding how to identify ethical issues. Right now, it's still new. It's still a bit scary to be like, what will this AI do? Will it be good? Will it be bad? How do we make sure that it actually is more on a spectrum? Like, I also disagree with the dichotomy of like, it has to be good, it has to be bad. It's like, well, we have control over ensuring that the guardrails move it in a better direction, prevents the worst of the harmful outcomes, but it's never just good or bad. It's about how we develop it, how humans have built the guardrails, solutions, and otherwise. So for me, the future of ethics and AI is equipping and empowering people more themselves to make a lot of these decisions. That ethics will just be an integrated part of technology development. Right now, it's still a bit more like a module that's added on instead of being integrated. Is like, as you develop technology, this is just something that you think about. So in that 5 to 10 year, it'll already be one of those things that is integrated in every student, into every worker. Right now, we see that people are coming out of university or whether they're later in their careers as well, that we have to train them on this thinking. And I don't think that will be true in 5 to 10 years. I think everybody will have learnt this. It'll be a critical skill all the way along, whether just like reading, coding will be, these are just things we know. Ethics and AI will just be something that people are taught. And I'd be excited to get to that stage instead of now, where I feel I have to tell people, I have to bring them along in the journey. It'll be easier at that stage. At the same time, 5 to 10 years, and again, without knowing where how advanced these technologies will be, it's also about how to ensure that we're always keeping ahead of nefarious actors. We know that as AI technology advances, nefarious actors will try and use that advanced AI in ways that we don't want, that are against our principles. And so ensuring that our technology stays ahead of that our solutions, our mitigations stay ahead of that. So it doesn't mean in 5 to 10 years it'll be easy. There will always be new challenges. There will always be ways nefarious bad actors are going to try and use this technology in bad ways. So partly, I think people will be more aware of it, but the challenge will remain that how do we use AI to prevent bad AI kind of uses by nefarious actors?
Yeah. So, in terms of like educating people, I think currently AI is kind of like a black box. We don't really understand sometimes what's going on around it, and a lot of people don't. And so, it's important to start to educate people more about the ethics um, and really about what artificial intelligence is as a whole. And so I guess I just wanted to end off with a final question. What are some of the limitations that we currently have in Google's approach to AI ethics, and how can we work to address these?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So in the work that we do around AI ethics, there's always open questions. I've touched on a couple of them already, which is we believe we're working so hard on identifying fairness issues. We conduct a huge amount of testing, both internally and with external experts, to test our technology and try and break it from an ethics or fairness perspective, because there's always new ways of thinking about what could go wrong or otherwise. So that's a gap. That's something that Google needs to keep ensuring we're doing, is listening to other people and testing our technology, instead of assuming that because we have these responsive innovation processes in the company, that will lead to good outcomes. It brings me back to my first answer that ethics is not just about outcomes, it's also about how you do it. And for Google, there's still gaps in who are we listening to? Who is our technology not working as well for? We've obviously done a lot in that space, but there's always more to do. The different communities will be affected by newer technologies, whether it's Bard or Gemini, in different ways than our old technology. So we always have to be conscious that Google's approach has to be inclusive of external voices, not just more diverse voices internally, which again is a work in progress, to get more people of more identities developing this technology, not just being users of this technology. So that's one big area that we're definitely aware of, that Google has gaps in terms of who is designing the technology, who will benefit the most from it, and ensuring we're closing those gaps from an inclusion perspective. From a gaps as well in our ethics approach is also about how we share that knowledge more broadly. Like it doesn't help that it would just be Google who is an ethical player in the AI space. It's about building an industry that people can trust. So we also consider part of our responsibility is up-leveling the industry to be more ethical and more responsible. That's good for everyone, that they can trust their technologies, whether it's a Google technology or another one on the market. And we believe that we can do more there, that we, like instances like this, we need to share with people what we're doing. We need to share with people that kind of shared responsibility, that if anyone is developing AI technology, we should all be considering these risks and harms, not just Google. And so I do believe that we can do more there to up-level the industry, hold it kind of industry accountable together, and have that as a shared responsibility. So recognizing that as another. And then the third one, just because I'm a rule of three person, I like choosing three things. AI regulation. Like I said before, there's a lot of AI regulation coming, but it's not always consistent. It looks very fragmented, and that can result, as I said, in either limitations on AI technology. It doesn't allow regional or national companies to grow. We want a healthy ecosystem here. It doesn't help if it's just the Googles of the world being successful. We want many companies, and regulation that is trustworthy and builds more responsible technology is useful. But right now there's a lot of fragmentation in AI regulation. So Google, again, how can we share some of the common themes, the common solutions that could be used in order to help AI regulation really achieve its goals? So they're kind of three things that come to mind. Certainly more to do.
Yeah. Okay, I guess just one last question before we're done. Um, how would you sort of currently define Google in just 5 words, just sort of encompassing all of what Google really, really is?
Advancing AI boldly and responsibly.
Wow, that was pretty fast. thank you so much for coming out today. It was such a pleasure to talk to you about, ethics, sentience, the election, all this kind of cool stuff about artificial intelligence that I've really been wanting to get to the core to, and I'm sure that our listeners want to as well. Once again, thank you so much for coming out here today. For everybody listening, this is MLITS. My name is Yash Sharma, and thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We hope you'll join us again soon for another episode of Machine Learning in the Sciences. Before we sign off, we'd like to give a special thank you to Zach Benitez and the rest of the team at KCAT TV 15. I'm Yash Sharma, and keep exploring the exciting world of machine learning.